You're listening to Autistic Viewpoints with Turrell, Burgess, and Daria Brown, where we talk about our past and present autistic experiences and much more.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to episode number 6 of Autistic Viewpoints. If you're here for the very first time, welcome. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. My name is Turrell Burgess.
And I'm Daria Brown.
And this week we have a very, very special guest. He is the president of the board of directors for ICDL, or the International Council on Development and Learning, the home of DIR Floor Time, and someone who's a very, very good colleague of ours, Dr. Emile Gouws. I really hope I pronounced it right. Um, so, Emile, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Turrell and Daria. It's a fantastic opportunity. It's nice to see you, and thank you for this podcast. It's a brilliant initiative, and with this podcast, we will touch a lot of lives and especially educate parents as well. So thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Emile lives in South Africa, and he also represents underrepresented groups at the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum. He recently received, well, it's more than recently now, almost 2 years ago, you received your PhD, and he is married to an autistic woman.
So, Emile, I first want to start off by asking you, what did it mean to you to become the president of the board of directors as an autistic individual yourself?
It's a very important question, and to become the president of a big organization, an established organization like ICDL, you tend to understand the importance of such a position, as you go along. But becoming the president, was one of the most meaningful moments of my life. As someone who grew up as a non-speaking autistic adult, and as someone who spent my childhood special in special programs in South Africa, this appointment represents far more than a leadership role. It symbolizes a journey from exclusion to belonging. It also reaffirms that autistic individuals have the ability, the insight, and the leadership qualities to influence the global developmental practice. Uh, when you think about the relevance of this, as someone who's the third, as you all know, the first board president was Dr. Stanley Greenspan. Second, uh, uh, Professor Gerald Costa, and myself. You tend to realize the importance of this position and the shoes that I needed to fill with reference to what these individuals achieved and what they represent. But I think it also reaffirms that autistic individuals have the ability, the insight, and leadership qualities to influence developmental practice. For me, stepping into this role was deeply emotional because it validated everything, the past experience that I went through. And at the point in my life, as a non-speaking individual, I actually questioned my abilities. And this represented much more for myself. And it also reminded me that autistic voices are not only capable, but they are essential. This was not just a personal achievement, but it was a message to every autistic individual, every child and adult who has never, who has ever been underestimated, and they can contribute towards society and lead an official role.
It's such an important message, Emile. And I remember, I'll refer people to the podcast that we've done together at Affect Autism. You said one of the takeaways, I can't remember if it was on a podcast or the presentation we did at an ICDL conference, you said the important message is that parents really believe in their children. And this is so important because you just described how you had experiences of being excluded and how this brought you to a point of belonging. And you've talked in the past podcasts about all the history, and you touched on it a minute ago, But one thing I remember you talking about is how much your mother believed in you and really pushed you to get to the point where you're at. And it was a lot of hard work. And that, I mean, first of all, what do you want to say about that?
Yeah, I remember that presentation quite well, and I think it was the first time that we met in person, and we spoke together, where we presented together at that ICDL conference. But you know, Daria, when you look in believing in your children, it is a very important topic because everywhere where I go, I have always urged parents to believe in their children because belief is the foundation of possibility. When we presented together that time, I spoke about how critical it is for parents to hold on to hope and to understand that development unfolds over time. And that is where the neuroplasticity comes in, with reference to neurodiversity. But I also want to address the perception that autism self advocates like myself and Turrell only represent one part of the spectrum, and that families of children with any kind of neurodiversity needs to feel um, needs to feel included. Um, I want to say very clearly that I see the challenges and I respect every individual's experiences. Raising a child with any form of neurodiversity comes with profound responsibilities, emotional strain, and also um, obstacles on a daily basis. Their voices matter deeply. At the same time, autistic adults, including those of us who are non-speaking, offer insights into sensory, emotional, and internal experiences their children might not yet be able to express. Instead of seeing a divide, I believe that we should see complementary perspectives. Parents understand their daily realities. Autistic adults understand the internal lived experience. And together, these voices create a fuller picture. We need both. We need to ensure that individuals with any kind of neurodiversity needs also have opportunities of representation through supported communication. This is not an either or, it's a both and. We all want the same thing, a good life, a life that is fulfilled, a life with purpose, and of course, a life where we are supported on a continuous basis without any form of discrimination, victimization.
It's very important, and it must be. And of course, I'm a parent of an autistic child who has a lot of support needs. I feel it too, but it must be really challenging for parents when they're not sure about the future. And that message of hope that you give is so important because there are parents of children who aren't speaking, and you were not speaking until you were about 15, but you then did speak and now you do speak. But some kids who have apraxia of speech or whatever, they may never speak verbally, and that's why what you said is so important about giving them opportunities to communicate in other ways, which can be very challenging. I just met with a caregiver yesterday whose child has been learning to do spelling with a letterboard, and just how grueling and how much energy it takes out of the child to push their fingers forward, and they get tired and they start to slouch and then they hold up their elbow. But how the child communicates that even if they walk away and protest, they might just need a break. They do want to keep learning because finally people see that there's something going on in this child's head that we didn't know was happening. And we're seeing so many examples of that online as well. do you have any further like insight or inspiration to how do we know if our kids are have apraxia of speech, or if they will just suddenly speak one day like you started to in your teens?
Yeah, Daria, I must say that when we speak about individuals who are non-speaking or those who are minimal speaking, it is so important to understand that communication always, and which you also referred to now in your question, communication does not start with words. Some autistic children communicate through gestures, eye movements, body language, AIC, behavior, rhythm, or energy. For instance, when I communicated officially, before I became speaking, I used to communicate with my hands uh, to show my frustrations, my emotions, and I made use of rocking movements to communicate. Um, because look, it was extremely difficult, and of course, the development and the stimulation occurred continuously. And the word that I used earlier was neuroplasticity, you know, where your brain learns and develops continuously. And when you talk about autistic individuals who speak few words, but those words cost them an incredible amount of emotional and physical effort, and we mustn't forget that. Others communicate internally and express themselves in ways that the world does not always recognize. None of these forms of communication are lesser. There's always a motive, and they are simply different. And different does not always mean incapable. It means the world needs to learn how to listen better and to understand. You know, and as someone, myself, if I refer back to my experiences, I want parents to know that communication is always happening, even when the words are not. Your child is telling you things through the way that they move, the things they avoid, the things they seek, the way they look at you, or even the way they regulate themselves. They are speaking with their whole being. It just requires a different type of listening. And that's the thing about DR floor time. It taught me specifically, and I'm sure everyone else who did the floor time course, that connection begins in the relationship long before it appears in speech. And for many children, speech might never be the main preferred form of communication. And that is okay, because communication is connection, and connection is human. And I thought about this coherently. You know, for parents, the most important message that I can give from the inside is this, and this is based on what I experienced as someone, as a child that was very frustrated. And I always question myself, why couldn't I speak? Why couldn't I let people know what I experienced? And this is what I want to know from the inside, is that never mistake silence for a lack of understanding. Many non-speaking or minimal speaking children understand far more than they can express. They think deeply, they feel deeply, and they process the world in ways that are often unseen. And of course you can experience this as well with your son Daria as well. And Turrell can also say a few things about this. But when the world does not accommodate them, it is easy to assume that they are not engaging. But inside there is a whole person trying to navigate the world that moves too fast, speaks too loudly, and expects communication in only one form. And the message here is simple for parents is to believe in your child's inner world, even when your child can, even when you cannot access it. Believe in their intelligence, their creativity, and their emotional depth and their potential. Your belief becomes the environment in which they grow. when you look at my personal experience and even my wife Sammy's development as a semi-verbal autistic lexic, is that once, look, for instance, if I refer to us, we were once children who couldn't speak, but we were believed in. And basically, and although we couldn't verbalize our emotions, we are fully aware what's going on around us. And belief became the foundation to understanding. So to parents, trusting in that communication, trust because communication will come in the way that is right for your individual, for your child. Celebrate their way of expressing themselves and meet them where they are, not where society says they should be. Communication is not just a label. Communication is not just a goal. Connection is. Once there's connection, everything else becomes possible.
So, Emile, so many gems. We could take 8 billion quotes from what you just said and plaster them around. Thank you so much for all of that. But I want to distinguish just one point that you made to parents. So when you said you communicated in many ways, whether it was rocking, whether it was this and that, how do we know as parents the difference between that being a reaction to what you're experiencing? So I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to rock, and maybe that's not what you used rocking for. Maybe you used rocking to show interest, whatever it is. How do we know that that's not just you responding to the environment versus you initiating communication? And of course, I will say that that's sort of a developmental trajectory on its own, but can you give parents any insight into, like, maybe that reaction in itself is communication, even if it's not you in your head thinking, I'm going to rock to show my parent that I like it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's a very important question, a very technical question as well. And when you look at communication, especially from a neurodiversity perspective, there's a lot of things to consider. First of all, you need to consider the environment, the people in the environment, and also you also need to consider the sensory challenges that the individual might experience in that environment as well. And look, as a parent, you know your child best, and one of the most important things parents should know is that communication and environmental responses are not the same thing, although they work together in some ways. And of course, what you mentioned there, Daria, it might be perceived as it will look similar from the outside. But as autistic individuals, especially those who are non-speaking or minimal speaking, we process the world in a much different way. Sometimes what looks like behavior is actually our response to sensory input, like light, sound, movement, chaos, or the emotion in the environment, the emotion of our parents, the emotion of people that we are close to. We pick stuff immediately up. And sometimes what looks like a simple reaction is actually communication, or well, that is how I perceive my own behavior. Is that the challenge is that the two can always overlap. A child might clap, for instance, or a child might flap, move away, cover their ears, or pace because the environment is overwhelming. That is regulation. But they may use those same movements intentionally to say, I need space, or I am scared, or please stop. So communication for us is often embedded in our patterns, our pacing, our stillness, our eyes, the rhythm of our breath, or the way we orient our bodies. It is different from neurotypical communication, if I can use that word, but It is meaningful and real. Parents offer, often ask how they can tell the difference between sensory reaction and true communication. So my answer, based on what I experienced as autistic adult, is that children communicate through the patterns they repeat, the choices they make, the things they avoid, and the things they seek. So communication is not always obvious. It unfolds when parents begin to observe the child with curiosity rather than fear. When a child repeatedly guides your hand towards something, pulls you to a specific place, looks at you in a certain moment, or changes their regulation in response to your voice, they are communicating in a different way. Even when they don't use words, that intent becomes visible through consistency and context. On the other hand, if a child reacts only when stimuli in an environment that are loud, too bright, too busy, too noisy, or unpredictable, that may be a sensory response rather than a communication. But even then, regulation is a form of communication too, and it tells you what the child can and cannot manage in that particular environment. From a lived experience, I want parents to know that communication is always continuously happening, always continuously evolving, even when it does not look like traditional communication. When you consider non-speaking autistic adults as well, and the biggest misconception out there is that people assume, from a personal experience in the education environment or in different environments that I moved in, people assume that I was simply reacting to my environment, but inside I was trying to show my needs, my feelings, and my understanding through my body, my movement, and my patterns. And keep in mind, this was before AIC. The key is for parents to slow down, observe, and connect before they interpret. When you tune into your child, and this is what I found as well, you begin to see the intention behind the movement. Over time, you become fluent in their language, a language that is unique to them, but still full of meaning. So my message will be for parents is to trust in your child, that your child communicates in a different way, and trust yourself to learn the language. You may not always understand it immediately, and that's okay. Communication is about relationship, not just a skill. So when you connect first, interpretation becomes clearer, and when your child feels understood, they're communicating, whether with words, sound, gestures, or movement, because that becomes stronger and more intentional.
That's great, Emile. Honestly, as someone who has been through like a similar process like you have, but now the thing is, I my parents, like when I was younger, obviously I went to um schools for people with special needs. But the thing is, my parents made sure that I was in like inclusion classes. Uh, there was a point where my parents didn't feel like I wasn't getting as much inclusion as I should. That's why they changed school districts. Like I'm unfamiliar with how it works in South Africa, but like did you go through like a similar experience where you had these inclusion classes, or it was just was your experience like a little different than mine?
The different, I must say, the thing about this neurodiversity field, when you listen to different stories of autistic adults throughout the world, the the key is that although we are different, although we're in different countries with a different socioeconomic circumstance, although we are living circumstances are totally different, we tend to experience the the thing, the same experiences just in a different way. And I always say to parents that the education that when you refer to autistic individual in education, that although you listen to different stories, the autism spectrum stays the same. Because as someone who went through an education system while being non-speaking for many years, I deeply understand why parents feel that their children are not being included, that their children are not being stimulated enough. Because my own education, when you look at me in a mainstream education system, and then later to a remedial education system, which is now referred to as a special needs education environment. My own education was defined by exclusion, misunderstanding, and low expectations. Being non-speaking, I was immediately isolated. I remember when I was in junior school, primary school, my first 2 years. In my second year, I remember the teacher tied up my hands because they didn't understand my way of communication. And teachers often assumed that because I did not speak, I didn't think, and I'm sorry that I'm using the word, but they thought that I was mentally impaired, and that was the common misconception out there. And decisions that were basically made for me, but not with me. I was placed in a separate education in a classroom, um, given work far below my intellectual ability, and the teacher spoke in front of me because they assumed that I wasn't present, but inside I understood everything, and I was aware of every conversation, every assumption from every teacher, every discussion point. Even when the students in my class didn't want to associate themselves with me because I was different, you know, it formed a big misconception. And every moment when people believed I couldn't learn, and there was a big misconception towards me. And the hardest part was not academia, because I was supported at home with academic work, but it was the emotional pain of being underestimated. And that was the biggest thing about my education, the biggest disappointment that I carry. And I think that contributed a lot towards my low self-esteem later on. Um, and of course, mental health challenges is that I often felt trapped in a system where my abilities were invisible because my communication looked different. This is why I advocate so strongly today, not because I read the research, and not because I have something to say, but because I love the consequences of invisibility. And I'm sure you did as well, and that's why you're a strong self-advocate. Um, I was thinking about this, is that when parents say their children are not included, I hear them, I believe them. Inclusion is not just a placement, it's a feeling. It is the experience of, it's the experience of being valued, being understood, and being recognized as competent. So my education basically only began to change when teachers in the education system started to believe that my silence was not a lack of intelligence, but a barrier in communication. So when I speak to parents today, I speak as someone who lived both sides, a child who was excluded, and of course the adult who's advocating for change. Every child deserves what I deserved, but rarely received. First of all, dignity, respect, connection, and a chance to show that they are truly are. And that is the biggest takeaway for me.
like you just described so well why so many autistic individuals have so much trauma, because that is such, just listening to that is traumatic, let alone experiencing it day after day, year after year. And you talked about the mental health challenges that come with that. It's so enlightening. Wonderful is not the right word, but enlightening to have someone like you be able to describe that to everybody else, because a lot of people don't get past that trauma, and that is a serious problem. So I hope that going forward, this education helps make people more aware to take action and change those preconceptions you talked about.
Yeah, definitely, Daria. Do you know that what I wanted to say is that when you look at this field specifically, you know that we as autistic individuals amongst themselves have got high suicide rate in the world. And there's a reason why the research shows that the living age of a autistic adult is 35 years old um, in the world, because the trauma and the anxiety that these individuals experience is real. For many of us, the trauma does not come from being autistic. It comes from the world, from how the world treats us. Being misunderstood, being excluded, the punishment for communication, for communicating differently, uh, or forced to fit in instead of being supported. So, when you think about my own journey as a education and the type of behavior towards me as an autistic individual, people assume that I was not paying attention, I was too sensitive, I was acting out, when I was actually overwhelmed, anxious, or trying my best to cope. Those experiences stay in the body. They build layers of trauma. They follow us into adulthood. Parents often feel that their children are not being included, and they are right. And they've got the full right to believe it. Because I know that feeling from the inside, being present in a classroom but not truly seen, heard, and understood. You feel like you as if you're on a brick wall, you know. When support is missing, when communication is misinterpreted, and when the sensory overload is ignored, school becomes a place of survival rather than learning. And that is why so many autistic individuals struggle with depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, and for me, this is a big one, burnout. Not because they are neurodiverse, but because they grow up in systems that were not fully designed for them and due to a lack of understanding.
I I relate so much to this because Daria, I never told you this, but at one point in my life I was depressed because felt like I truly felt like nobody understood me. But but over time I got to learn that, yeah, I do have a small circle of friends that do understand me. I have a family that understands, and at the end of the day, that's all you really need if you're going to get to where you are in life. And so, I'm glad that you're really putting this out there because, um, because the thing is, some people can say that they understand what, um, what we're going through, but honestly, um, I feel like more people need to spend more time with these individuals to really understand what not just what we went through growing up, but even now as autistic adults, despite all the successes that we're having, like there are probably still like some of those days, I mean, like and so like I really that's why I relate to so much that you're saying right now because I also deal with anxiety quite a bit, and so like it's just very refreshing to know that someone else feels the same way that I am, um, especially right now.
Yeah, yeah, yes, Turrell. Look, it's and that's why I say that um it's very heartwarming for me to know because I always say that although we are different, we are in different countries, we grew up differently. The experiences that we experience is similar, and you can relate to some of them. Um, And look, like I said previously, many people don't truly understand what you said, what autistic individuals are going through. And that misunderstanding causes real harm. From the outside, people might see behaviors, reactions, or communication differences and make assumptions, but they don't see the internal experience. The sensory overload, the anxiety for not being accommodated, not being included, not being understood, the effort it takes to communicate in environments not built for us, the trauma from being excluded or punished for things that you cannot control, or the exhaustion from masking, because it just doesn't feel too safe. So for many autistic people, every day is full of content adjustment, strategy to cope, emotional, I call it emotional labor, that others never notice. That is why it often feels like the world misunderstands us. Not because we are different, but because the environment is just not too accessible. And when people start to listen, start to observe without judgment, and respecting our communication styles, they begin to realize something important. Autistic individuals are not just struggling because who they are, we are struggling because the world is not designed to include us. And that is what we need. We need understanding, accommodation, and also we need people to reasonably accommodate us.
And when I think about the female experience, because I've been immersed in this for a year and a half now, interacting with a lot of other adult autistic females, I'm even noticing, like, I know what I'm feeling inside as I'm listening to what both of you say. And then I glance and see myself on Zoom, and my face is not showing that at all. Like, if I look at my face, I'm like, oh, that looks like a weird face for what I'm experiencing. And I know a lot of other females have said this too, that we are misinterpreted our whole lives. And I always been too, where people think either you're conceited or you're not paying attention or your facial expressions are not matching what's supposed to be given some kind of heavy emotional content or whatever. And also a lot of the female experience for people like me who've been late diagnosed is that even though we are perceived as not having very many support needs, we're otherwise successful, did well in school, are verbal and articulate and can do this and that and function, um, we are assumed to know better than to say that thing that was awkward, or have that look on your face that is inappropriate, or not respond in ways that other friends do, and thus you're like a bit strange or whatever. And I just feel the need to throw in that female experience because we're learning so much more about how that's very different than the male experience. And I don't even feel valid or justified enough in speaking for that female experience yet because I'm so new to it. And I feel like I've had a lot of privilege and not had a lot of suffering. But maybe that's because what I've experienced, I so internalized, and it's the only thing I know. If I compare it to someone else's experience, it's totally different. But everything that goes on in my experience, even though the outside looks functional, and I hate that word functional, um, for lack of a better word, it's on the inside that nobody sees, the constant rumination and the constant questioning and the constant lack of feeling like you belong and all of those things you described, even though I could communicate. So in that way, I resonate with everything you said as well. And of course, that giving me the insight to parent my autistic son who's somewhere in that 3D spectrum in the middle somewhere.
Yeah, uh, it yeah, what you said is quite true. And you are quite right when you refer to the experiences of males and females on the spectrum. Because look, the autistic experience for females is often very different from what people expect or understand. And of course, many females mask their feelings, hide their emotions, or express themselves in ways that are not immediately obvious. So others assume that they, for instance, are fine or understand everything, but even when they are struggling inside. And because of this, many women, and this is what research says, it's stated in research that many autistic females are diagnosed late in life, sometimes well into adulthood, and only then begin to understand why their experience always feels different. Society expects us to know better, to respond in ways that fit typical social norms, or to be more socially aware than we actually are. But what is often missed is that our insight, our emotional processing, and our experiences are constant and intense, even if they are invisible. So many people cannot see the effort that it takes to navigate the world while masking or managing sensory overload, anxiety, or social expectations. And females, and I think for females on the spectrum, often carry enormous internal understanding and perception that goes unrecognized because it does not fit into the stereotypical presentation of autism. We are learning more and more that the female experience is unique, as you rightly said, Daria. That the experience is unique, nuanced, and requires recognition, support, and understanding, not judgment or assumptions. No one can see the depth of insight or the fatigue from the constant trying to adapt to a world, trying to fit in that world that the world doesn't always notice. So, yeah, I still believe that it's fascinating what the experience, and we need more people to come out to share their experiences, more females to share their experience as well, because, and I think that is where the big gap is, where we've got the highest, um, the autistic females are needs to be more researched, because I think that is the generation that's lost, and that we need more research to understand females. Yeah.
I mean, I know like both of us are very busy individuals, trying to, raise awareness and continue to convince, our not just our but like so many parents who have autistic children. But, my thing is, I guess my question is, what has been like the most rewarding part of all this? Like the like of everything that you've done, like uh, during your career, like what has been the most rewarding part of this whole experience?
There were a lot of rewards. Um, and I must say that it first comes down to the individual. It comes down to representation of supporting families, but it also comes down to meeting my wife, to have Mokim as a carer, um, who is our mother, who supports us on a daily basis. Autism Self Advocacy also helped me with the insight to understanding my own experience, accepting myself unconditionally. It helped to formulate my purpose. You know, it created a whole new being of being acceptance, making, friends to meet people, to be able to travel the world, see places, but more importantly, to give hope to people, to parents, to motivate, to tell parents that it's okay, to create a space where you'll be able to help people, to not only think about your own achievements, but to look from the inside and to help where you can, to give yourself to people, and I think that is for me worthwhile because after speaking to parents and after sharing my story, for instance, a parent will tell me that they finally understand their child a little better. Or when a young autistic person realizes that their voice matter, it creates that sense of belonging. And that is for me the greatest reward, to see that hope returns to families who once felt isolated, or watching neurodivergent individuals reclaim their identity and dignity. It also reminds me why I'm involved in not only in research but as an autism South advocate, why I speak at conferences, because to make sure that no one, especially in the global south, ever feels invisible or forgotten, because that's a sense of purpose. And using my story to create change is what keeps, my feet grounded and humbled. And let me tell you, the autism spectrum has got a tendency to make you humble on a daily basis. Because once you get too comfortable, and I see to myself, once you get too comfortable, then you need to do something different. You need to change. You need to do this more, better. Um, and for me, that's the thing, that it always depends on the environment, the people, and the expectations of the environment. So the greatest reward will definitely be, being in a position to help others, be meeting people, being in a leadership position to make decisions, but more importantly, to have family, that understands you, and to create that feeling of everything you want is here and to be included. And that's the most rewarding thing. And that is what we always wanted, a place where we felt that we belong. And Autism Advocacy gave me a lot of things, but it gave me a sense of belonging, which I'm very grateful for, and purpose.
That's great. That's great.
Thank you
That's
so
amazing.
much, Emile, for this episode. We will both treasure it, and I'm sure so many other parents and autistics and practitioners everywhere will. Thank you so much. I hope we can get your wife, Sammy, on a future podcast. It would be incredible.
It would be amazing. Yeah.
And we'll let you discuss that with her and see how comfortable she is. But thank you so much, and listeners, we'll be back in the new year. So thank you so much for being with us on Autistic Viewpoints.
Thank you.
You can learn more about the International Council on Development and Learning, the home of DIR Floor Time, at www.icdl.com.